cold and blustery winter day, not unlike this one, but with a little more snow. And already a fresh and heavy snow had fallen overnight. It was Sunday around 8:30, and because it was Sunday, nothing had been plowed. The trip out to the northwest suburbs was as treacherous as you might expect, and by the time I was out there, I was frazzled, cold, and not entirely sure I was going to bring the story of the night ministry and the work that we do to provide hospitality to those experiencing homelessness. I wasn't sure I was going to do a very good job. I was all full of winter and all lacking a sense of abundance after the journey. I entered the doors of this congregation, a small Lutheran congregation in a quiet suburb, and immediately was greeted by my host, an effusive and bubbly woman with bright clothing and lots of energy. And she ushered me into a cozy, quiet room with a cup of coffee and a fireplace. I graciously sipped my coffee and roasted myself by the fire. As I was beginning to feel human again, an older woman walked in. She took off her coat in one fluid and graceful gesture and took a seat on one of the overstuffed leather couches that seemed ubiquitous in congregations of a certain age. She herself was of a certain age, but she wore it well. I was especially drawn toward her purple cape, because purple is my favorite color, and the large cat brooch on her left shoulder holding it in place. We were the only two people in the room. The early service was just ending, and the hymn was being tiredly sung. There was a sound of general coffee preparation occurring in the kitchen. I approached her, offered my hand, and said, "Good morning." "Good morning," she returned, rather curtly, and with an accent that I couldn't immediately place. I asked her about her brooch, and she lit up. "Oh, yes, it's a favorite of mine. I used to have many cats. But now, at my age, I have cat things to remind me of the actual cats I loved." I thought this was a lovely sentiment and told her so. Shortly after this brief conversation, I began my adult religious education program and was telling people about the work of the night ministry. The woman with the cat brooch sat quietly, smiling softly and nodding when I shared stories of the services that we provide and the youth that we help. And when it came time for questions, my bubbly host raised her hand with great enthusiasm and pointed at the woman with the cat brooch. The older woman continued to sit, sage-like, a picture of elder calm. "Aiden, I have to tell you about this woman right here. She helped young people escape the Nazis in World War II." There are many questions and situations that I have come to expect when I speak to a group of people. I do this every week. This was not one of those responses. I was dumbstruck. I couldn't talk, and so I asked the elder to tell me about it. That was all I could get out of my brain. The most engrossing 5 minutes passed as she told the story of her childhood in Nazi-occupied France, and how, while still an adolescent, she helped other youth escape the concentration camps and find a safe home elsewhere. She said, "I look at these young gay people who are living in the cold in Chicago, and my heart aches. We must help them." Her words rang out in the cinder block Protestant classroom. They settled prophetically into the silence. In my work, I deal in people and in details. There are a lot of Outlook calendar meetings and Excel spreadsheets. There are many, many individuals, congregations, community groups, and corporations who are looking to volunteer with us and learn about what we do and the people that we serve. Most of the time, ministry is measured in tube socks and trail mix, cookies, and hygiene kits. Gratitude is abounding, and the thank yous pour out like water. The ministry that I'm privileged to do with what seems like literally all of Chicagoland is frankly overwhelming in its complexity and its generosity. But I'll be honest, it's short on those transcendent moments of ministry, like the one I was just telling you about. Moments like that morning in the classroom where such deep truth is spoken by one who spoke from a place of deep integrity. It moved the room, and it moved ourselves. In that classroom, the woman who impressed us all with her wisdom and clarity defined an important balance and distinction when it comes to making a difference in the world. She clarified the balance between charity and justice and how to live in integrity while doing both. So there are millennia of theological and ethical writings on this very topic. That wacky bishop of Hippo, Christian theologian St. Augustine, is known for saying that charity is no substitute for justice withheld. And one thinks of the adjunct college professor from Duquesne, who died in abject poverty because she refused to take the university's charity, when what is happening is dehumanizing thousands of incredibly brilliant people, and a complete overhaul is needed in education, like so many other areas. Fast forward to the early 20th century and the social gospel movement, where Walter Rauschenberg and some of our Unitarian and Universalist forebears engaged with what they saw as society's ills. The conditions of slums became a topic of discussion, and work was done with the people who lived in those neighborhoods. Communities were built. People came together to make a difference. In this theology, charity is a warm kind of Christian love given when you feed, clothe, or tend to someone's most immediate physical and spiritual needs. And in fact, that's how many of us know charity. Justice would occur in this theology when all of society is ridden of its problems and true peace and the kingdom of God is achieved. The actions that would be considered justice include working on systems that continue to oppress people and populations, approaching the fight from justice from that wide-scale approach. In particular, there was an emphasis on the sins of industrialization and the robber barons who engaged in the wholesale gouging of the American public. Not that we know anything about that today. Exactly. In his book, Toward Collective Liberation, Unitarian Universalist and anti-racist activist Chris Crass writes about many movements where people have joined together, and as our reading earlier indicated, they engaged in both charity and justice together. He outlines specific movements for justice and how communities were formed and sustained around systemic issues that were affecting individual bodies and specific populations. One chapter is devoted to the Food Not Bombs movement. I'm sure there are a few people here who are familiar with that movement, yeah? Mm-hmm. Right. And perhaps were involved with it. The Food Not Bombs movement arose out of the anti-nuke movement. It started in the 1980s as we saw homelessness increase with the trickle-down economics of Ronald Reagan. And in San Francisco, Food Not Bomb really took on a place in the community as they went to a park every day, a park that was located in a place that was meant to afflict the comfortable. And they set up a gigantic meal. They would serve vegetarian meals to hundreds and hundreds of people. Charity, in this case, was a massive meal strategically located. But while they also did that, they also pushed back against police brutality. They taught people who were homeless about how to defend themselves and about their civil rights when confronted with police. And they successfully created a community of solidarity and struggle that connected people who were street-based with people who had homes. And those people, they came together to create change. The folks of Food Not Bombs recognize that people can't begin struggling for freedom from oppression until their basic needs are met. Food is one of those fundamental human needs, and the way that we connect in our common humanity so often. We all eat, we all need food, but by feeding the many, they called into question why the many were hungry in the first place, and why the homeless were being brutalized and criminalized throughout the city. What began with charity blossomed into justice. Crass writes of their work and says, a collective liberation approach to organizing strives to put our day-to-day work into a long-term perspective of revolutionary change. Of course, no movement for justice is perfect, and it's essential to be grounded when approaching the delicate tightrope between charity and justice. So how do we do that? With integrity, with being present in our community, and with bringing our whole selves. James Luther Adams is my favorite Unitarian theologian. His pivotal time theologically was in the mid-20th century. He talked about the individual person in the context of the scope of history. That there was an imperative that we know ourselves on a historical scale and understand ourselves in relationship to all other people of progressive faith throughout history. I would go on to add that to understand ourselves within the vast scope of creation was also a goal, but Adams wasn't as woo as I am. He called Unitarian Universalism a historical religion, one rooted in the story and myth of Judeo-Christianity, but finding form and embodiment in the heretic, the transcendentalist, the activist, and the humanist. He emphasized how connected we were to history, to the history of our planet, to all movements of justice, and how essential knowing that history is to our identity. He contended, as I do, that there is a sense that what is going on has had a past, but the present also has its peculiarly unique features. And one's social responsibility must be related to those unique features of the present. When we connect to our history and the history of other people who are working towards sustainable social change, when we reach out, when we swim among history as it is created in the moment and participate in the revelatory and revolutionary unfolding of the human experience, and our endeavors for justice, for joy, and for liberation will come to fruition. Bell Hooks writes of our interdependence on one another to create change, love, and community. She says, until we are all able to accept the interlocking, interdependent nature of systems of domination and recognize specific ways each system is maintained, we will continue to act in ways that undermine our individual quest for freedom and collective liberation struggle. In the long run, it will be about the charity of sandwiches and tube socks. It will also be about the justice of rallies, of speeches. It will take place in the local church kitchen and in the halls of Congress. It's happening in our schools and on our streets. It's happening in Ferguson, in Oakland, and in Chicago as we sit here. In the space of integrity, where charity meets justice, there is a catalyst for transformational community. When we understand the necessity of our striving together, of our collective liberation, we have the power to not only change the world, but to change our hearts and connect us to the deeper truths of our interconnectedness. We are infinite in our finitude. That mortality binds us inextricably to history. In that history is great love. We are tasked to take that love, to make it real, and to bring it brightly and courageously into the world. May it be so. Amen. Blessed. Please join me.